Hello and welcome to another 25 Flat Earth bad memes. 1. The Nile flows uphill. This is referring to the fact that the Nile flows north. By convention, we put north at the top of maps. It's got nothing to do with up and down. North isn't up and south isn't down. Rivers flow from places of high elevation to places of low elevation. They basically are flowing to be closer to the centre of the earth. Just because the Nile is flowing north doesn't mean it's flowing uphill. The people who say this, either they're incredibly ignorant or they're being deliberately dishonest. I find it hard to believe that they genuinely believe that they think this. I just think it's a bit of a dishonest tactic. 2. How can the atmosphere be next to a vacuum? Strictly speaking, although we refer to it as a vacuum, space isn't an absolute vacuum. There is a small amount of hydrogen distributed through the whole of space. So even in outer space, there is a very, very small amount of gas pressure. It's so close to zero that for all intents and purposes, it's a vacuum. It's not an absolute vacuum. Now, as I've explained in another video, you can have a pressure gradient in a fluid when you have forces acting on the fluid to keep it like this. Without any forces, the pressure will evenly distribute itself throughout a gas. So if you get a build-up of pressure in one area, the gas will flow away from that and the pressure will evenly distribute itself. Now we have a pressure gradient on Earth because gas has weight, because there's a gravitational force pulling it down. So a line from the surface of the Earth going into space, if you follow along that line, the gas pressure or the atmosphere pressure will decrease the further you get away from the surface of the Earth till it gets to virtually zero when you're out in space. It doesn't reach absolute zero, it just gets very close to it. 3. How can Chicago be visible from 60 miles away? Well, we've all seen the photograph taken from Mir State Park that shows Chicago. It's been adequately explained as refraction caused by unusual atmospheric conditions. If you don't accept that explanation, then it's very easy to prove that it's wrong. Go to Mir State Park and reproduce that image and show that you can see Chicago from there every day of the year. That's all you have to do. No flat earther has ever reproduced that image. There's a good reason for that, and it's because if you go to Mir State Park, you'll find that most of the time you can't see Chicago from there. That indicates that it's due to very unusual atmospheric conditions when you do see it. 4. You can't prove the Earth is a sphere by observing the sky. This is just a typically dishonest tactic of flat earthers, which is to arbitrarily dismiss evidence that's inconvenient to them. There is a huge amount of evidence that we can observe from looking from the sky that indicates that Earth is a sphere. We know from the motion of the sun, the moon, and the stars that the only feasible interpretation of that motion is that the Earth is a sphere. So this is a completely dishonest tactic to say this. It's just a way of dismissing evidence that you don't like without giving any good reason for it. 5. Eratosthenes' experiment could also support the flat Earth. There's a small grain of truth in this. If the Earth was flat, you could move away from the place where the sun is directly overhead a certain distance, then measure the angle of elevation of the sun in the sky and use basic trigonometry to calculate the height of the sun above the Earth. Yeah, that's true. The problem with that is that the further you go away from the place where the sun is directly overhead, the lower in elevation you'll calculate for the sun. you won't get a consistent answer. It'll depend on how far away you move from the sun. The reason for that is because the relationship between the angle of elevation and the distance you are from where the sun is directly overhead does not fit a flat Earth. The relationship fits a spherical Earth. So therefore, assuming a flat Earth, you cannot get a consistent height for the sun. 6. Perspective can explain the horizon. No, it can't. This is just a complete misunderstanding of perspective and vanishing points. The vanishing point is a point in your visual field. It's not a point a finite distance away from you in space. The horizon also is not some kind of byproduct of the way our vision works. We see a horizon because we live on a large surface. That's why we see horizons. Flat earthers talk about the horizon as if it's some kind of property of your vision or something like this. They just make up their own pseudo-optics to try and get away from the fact that ships go over the horizon and that the most obvious explanation is that the Earth is curving. So they make up all this nonsense about perspective and horizons that doesn't work and doesn't fit reality. 7. If the Earth is spinning, why don't the oceans fly into space? Because it's not spinning fast enough, basically. That's all. It's spinning once a day, rotates once a day. It's very slow. It's not fast enough. 8. Copernicus invented the spherical Earth. No, he didn't. Copernicus proposed the heliocentric model of the solar system. Previous to that, there was a geocentric model where the Earth was a sphere. Contrary to flat Earth propaganda, it was widely believed in Middle Ages Europe that the Earth was a sphere. There was not a widespread belief that it was flat at that time. Nobody at that time believed the Earth was flat. It was accepted by academia that the Earth was a sphere. Copernicus is not the reason we believe the Earth is a sphere. 9. Gravity was invented to justify the spherical Earth. Gravity was initially, as we all know, proposed by Isaac Newton. We have an enormous amount of information about Isaac Newton. We have his own private writings, we have his letters, we have knowledge about correspondence he had with other scientists. Nowhere in any of his letters or his own private notes did Newton ever express any concern about the fact that Earth is a sphere or that he invented gravity to try and justify it. Newton was essentially trying to explain the elliptical motion of the planets around the sun. That was his primary concern with gravity. His genius was to connect gravity with terrestrial motion as well. He realised that gravity was the thing that kept the Earth going around the sun, it kept the moon going around the Earth, and it was the same thing that made apples fall to the ground. This was his genius and realisation. It was nothing to do with justifying the fact that Earth is a sphere. There's no evidence to back that up. It's just a total lie. 10. Newton was a Freemason. There's no evidence at all that Newton was a Freemason. Even if there was, it wouldn't mean anything anyway. Most prominent men in his time were probably Freemasons, just like now. My grandfather was a Freemason. Thousands of men throughout history have been Freemasons. When Newton did his great work on gravity and the laws of motion, he was still a young man. He was a complete outsider. I mean, he grew up on a farm in Lincolnshire. His brilliance was realised and he had an opportunity to go to Cambridge as an undergraduate. While he was an undergraduate, he didn't mix with other students. He had one friend. When the plague hit Cambridge, he returned to Lincolnshire, and that's when he did his great work in private. He was a total outsider, and he didn't even let anyone know that he'd done this great work for years after it. So even if Newton became a Freemason later, his work in science would have nothing to do with it, even if he was one, which there's no evidence he was. And like I said, even if he was, it doesn't matter, because what matters in science are ideas. Newton's ideas stand or fall on their own merits. because they fit evidence. It's got nothing to do with who Newton was as a man. His ideas stand or fall on their own merits. 11. They are lying to hide God from us. I don't believe in God, but I understand that God is meant to be an infinite, eternal being that is present everywhere in space and time. How do you hide something like that from people by telling them that the earth is a sphere? How do you hide an infinite, eternal being that exists everywhere? It's a ridiculous claim. And why wouldn't this being just let us know that the earth is flat and that we were being lied to? If there is a God, God could end this in a second, an instant, if we are being lied to about this. So it's just another ridiculous flat earth idea. 12. They want you to feel insignificant. This is referring to the scale of the universe. What gives your life significance and meaning is the relationships you have with other human beings and the things that you do. How big the universe is has no impact on that at all. What you do in your life is not affected by the size of the universe. The universe being smaller doesn't mean that your life becomes more significant or meaningful. It's rather infantile to need the universe to be really small and to feel like you're the most important thing in the universe, to feel like your life has meaning or significance. That's not what gives your life significance. 13. Show us a spinning ball with water sticking to it. This is just a totally disingenuous tactic. Our standard understanding of the earth and of gravity would not predict that you could hold a ball in your hand and have water sticking to it. Our standard understanding of the universe would predict that the water would fall off that ball and stick to the ball that you're standing on, because the ball you're standing on has a much bigger gravitational field than the ball you're holding in your hand. So demonstrating that water falls off of a ball doesn't in any way debunk our standard understanding of the universe, because that's exactly what we would predict would happen. It's a completely unrealistic thing to ask, and it's dishonest. We know that it's extremely unlikely that a ball could exist big enough and with the right conditions to have liquid water sticking to it like the earth. We don't know how much liquid water there is in the universe. We know there's not a huge amount. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think there's another planet quite like the Earth that's been discovered yet. So asking for this is just completely dishonest. It's basically like saying, I'm going to ask for completely unrealistic evidence, and because you can't provide it, that means that I'm right. It's disingenuous. 14. The Earth being flat proves God exists. No, it wouldn't prove that at all. I've thought about this and I've thought, okay, what would it mean if I found out the Earth was flat? I wouldn't leap to the conclusion that God exists. I'm not quite sure what I would interpret it as. I mean, I would still be looking for a naturalistic explanation. If it was shown that the Earth was flat with a dome over it, I'd probably be inclined to believe that it had been constructed by some kind of naturalistic intelligence. I wouldn't leap to the conclusion that it was all down to a god. There's no reason to leap to that conclusion at all. The Earth being flat would prove nothing about the existence of God. 15. Circumnavigating airplanes are flying in a circle. So this is the idea that if a plane is flying around the world, that it must be, on a flat Earth, it would be flying in a circle, which means it would have to be constantly banking to the left or right. But a plane can circumnavigate the world by flying in a perfectly straight line. Planes that are circumnavigating aren't constantly banking to the left or right. 16. Science is a religion. Science is about as far from a religion as it's possible to get. Science is nothing like a religion. A religion's authority is based on claims to specialness. There are people that are special, or there are books that are special. Say, for example, Christianity. Christianity rests on the belief that Jesus wasn't just another man, he was special. That the Bible's not just another book, it's special. Science is nothing like that. There's nothing special in science. There's no person in science who's above being questioned. Science is not about people, it's about ideas. And the ideas in science, like I said before, they stand or fall on their own merits. There is no idea in science that's not above being questioned or criticised. And all the ideas in science must be rigorously compared to empirical evidence. If they don't match empirical evidence, then they're wrong, and that's the end of it. Religions are essentially unfalsifiable. How do I falsify Christian beliefs? They're based on an assumption that Jesus was a special person, and you've got no proof of that. So there's nothing like that in science. So science is not a religion. 17. They don't take the curvature into account when laying railways. Well, why would they? I've never really understood this one. You build a railway, you follow the land curves naturally, very gradually. You'd follow the curvature as you went. What is it that you have to take into account? I don't really understand. 18. The ice wall is patrolled by soldiers. If the Earth was flat, the ice wall, flat earthers claim that Antarctica is the ice wall that is round the outside of it. It would be about 80,000 miles long. Now, flat earthers are suggesting that this is being effectively patrolled 24/7 by soldiers who will turn you away at gunpoint if you try to get to the ice wall. Well, at any one moment, even if there was one soldier on average every mile, that would be 80,000 soldiers. In sub-zero conditions, 24/7, all year round. And presumably they would have to be relieved by other soldiers. So, you're getting into hundreds of thousands of soldiers whose job it is to just patrol the ice wall on the off chance that someone makes a dash for it. Who are these soldiers? Who's paying for it? Why is it none of them ever say anything? Do their families know that they're doing this? Do the soldiers understand that's what they're doing? It's an absurdity. 19. You only believe the Earth is a sphere because of NASA. This is part of a kind of narrative that's evolved online. That's not just about flat Earth, it's a whole broad narrative. And at the core of it is this thing about NASA, an obsession with NASA. NASA is one space agency that has existed since the 1950s. It's not the primary source of scientific knowledge on Earth, and it's not even the only space agency on Earth. Our scientific understanding of the Earth has been developed in countless institutions all over the world, over centuries, internationally. There are centres of scientific research all over the world, and universities everywhere, and other kinds of scientific research. There's nothing special about NASA, and I don't believe the Earth is a sphere because of NASA. It's got nothing to do with it. 20. The sun moves around the North Pole. There isn't a scrap of evidence to support this conjecture. You just have to look at the direction the sun rises and sets at different times of the year. It's not just slightly wrong. The predictions of this model of the sun moving around the North Pole are radically different from what we actually see. I mean, all you have to do is go to the southern tip of South America in December. The sun almost circles right round you. Or in New Zealand in December, or Australia even. You'll see the sun circling almost right round you, which is completely contradictory to any notion that the sun moves around the North Pole. 21. There are no accurate maps. This is absolute nonsense. At any given moment, there are thousands of airplanes in the air flying, and they all manage to reach their destination accurately. Not just close, they get to the exact place they're flying to. Every day, hundreds, thousands of times a day this happens. Planes flying all over the world. Short journeys, long journeys, from a journey lasting half an hour to a journey lasting 24 hours. Airplanes manage to get to where they're going. They always get there. They always get to the exact destination they're supposed to be going to. That's only possible if we have accurate maps and an accurate understanding of the world. This is an utterly ridiculous claim. 22. Antarctica has never had an indigenous population. Well, why would it have? For a start, it's very isolated. The shortest distance by sea to Antarctica is from the southern tip of South America. It's over 600 miles across open ocean. From New Zealand, it's over 1,500 miles. From the southern tip of Africa, it's over 2,000 miles. It would have been extremely unlikely that indigenous peoples would have ever have made it to Antarctica. And even if they did, what would they have found when they got there? A place almost singularly hostile to human existence. There would only have been food sources on the coasts. There would be no source of water. Antarctica is one of the driest places on Earth. To have water, you would have had to have melted the ice, which means you'd need fire, which means you need wood, and there's no trees. So how could people have survived there? I mean, how could people have even reached it? And even if they did reach it, how could they have survived there? I mean, people survive in the Arctic, but you can walk to the Arctic from anywhere in America, Europe, or Asia. There's a gradation of climates as you go further and further north. People gradually adapted to living in that kind of environment. If an indigenous people had even gone from South America, they would have had no skills to live in that kind of environment. They wouldn't have been able to survive. So it's not surprising there's never been an indigenous population there. 23. Gyroscopes prove the Earth is flat. No, they don't. They prove the opposite. There's a thing called gyroscopic drift, which happens partly because the Earth rotates. Airplanes have to compensate for it. There are various mechanisms by which they do this. But if you look at what gyroscopes actually do on planes, they prove that the Earth is a sphere. 24. Everything to do with space is fake. This is this part of this big narrative that moon landings were fake, ISS is fake, there's no satellites. There are no genuine images of the Earth from space. Well, I always say to flat earthers, okay, let's assume that's true. What does it prove? Even if you could prove that we'd never been to space and the whole thing is a complete fake and fraud, you would not have advanced the case for the Earth being flat so much as a nanometer. It would prove nothing. The point is, if you want to believe the Earth is flat, you need it to be fake. Because if even one tiny part of the space program is genuine, the Earth is not flat. This is what you need. You need the whole thing to be fake, not to prove the Earth is flat, but just to leave open the possibility that the Earth is flat. So even if you get to the point that you've proved that the whole space program is fake, you've still got all your work to do to prove the Earth is flat. You've not proven anything about the shape of the Earth. So you can go on about space all day if you want. It doesn't prove anything about the Earth being flat. 25. The Coriolis effect is selective. This is something I saw recently where someone said if the Coriolis effect, airplanes would veer off course and fly in totally different directions. Just like if you fire a bullet, it starts to curve because, at least from our perspective, it starts to curve. It's a completely fake comparison because a bullet is fired from a gun. It's given an initial amount of momentum, and that's the momentum that keeps it going until it hits something. That's not how an airplane works. An airplane is constantly propelling itself with its own engines. So it's a totally erroneous comparison. It doesn't even stand up at all as any kind of argument. That's the end of another 25 flat earth bad memes.